Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Woo-hoo.
Hello, welcome to Conversations with SOTU. I'm Adrienne Metcalf.
And I'm Josh Schwartzbeck.
Josh is a professional channel who channels the consciousness. He's a medium, channels the consciousness we call SOTU. SOTU and I have been in a long conversation for over 20-some years about life and humanity and what we're all going through, and today you get to listen in to part of that. So we'll see what you think of it. Josh, are you ready to channel?
Oh, are you ready? That's the question. All right, here we go. All right. Well, hello everyone. We are SOTU, and today just happens to be the 16th anniversary of the 9/11 fiasco, and we believe we'll be speaking a little bit about that today, as well as, what shall we say, the latest occurrences of the hurricanes and the inundations in Texas and the upcoming 2 or 3 more things that are going to be happening in a relatively short period of time, and how it all ties together. So.
Hi, SOTU. Well, I was asked, we were asked as we came in today, is this the wrath of God?
Well, it's the wrath of God if you believe in the dynamic of the concept of a God that is somehow made in your image, if somehow you think that the limitations of humanity relate to the dynamics of the anger of the divine, and we would say in that sort of circumstance the answer is no, it's not the wrath of God. It is a dynamic of your, remember, you either create your reality or you allow it. So it is either a dynamic of your creation or a dynamic of your allowance. So, that leads us into the whole dynamic of taking responsibility for your world and for yourselves. But also we want to tell you that there have been many impediments, and there have been many influences, and there has been much manipulation in the whole dynamic, and each of you in your own way question yourselves and your ability to create reality, simply because of all the doubts that have been planted within your psyche for many, many, many thousands of years.
All right. And we still manage to, at moments, shine with who we truly are.
Yeah, there is those dynamics, but does it have to take a disaster for the true nature of humanity to shine through? And in fact, if you understand the concept of soul's journey,
yes,
which is a dynamic of growth, if that happens on an individual level, does it also not happen on the level of the entire species? Of course it does.
So you've talked about our species being at a point of growth now, of moving from our adolescence into our adulthood.
Correct.
So that is a species-wide change in behavior. maturing.
It has been being urged for the longest time now. You know, we can take it all the way back to 1963 and the circumstances of what was going on back then, and it all ties together, you know. And right after World War II, a certain arrogance took hold within the United States, and when that arrogance took hold, you believed that you could create the reality you wished without any repercussions, without any understanding of the inherent morality in life and in dealing with each other.
We sort of forgot who we are.
Well, but did you ever really know? You see, that's ultimately the question. If there have been perhaps hundreds of thousands of years of manipulation, of keeping you from stepping into your full empowerment simply because let us say, you know, there's this theory out there that your genes have been manipulated by outside forces, and we would say that that is quite likely in its own way. And in fact, as they discover more and more of the dynamics of gene research, they are going to find more and more, what shall we say, DNA from outside of the set of Earth. But again, what would happen, what would your response be if you came in and you manipulated a species and you manipulated the DNA of a species, and all of a sudden you realized that they were more than you are? Basically because you manipulated their DNA. Not only do they have their own abilities as a species, but they now have your abilities and the abilities that you gave them as a species. So what would your response be? Control.
I'd be afraid and maybe a little jealous. So you're giving.
So what we're trying to tell you is that, you know, think about things. Those that are most, what shall we say, most responsible for the DNA given to you are taught you analytics, moved you into the dynamics of your mind, but your true creative power is with Mother Earth. Your true creative power is with your emotions. Your true creative power is with your thoughts, your words, and your feelings. Everything is powered by emotion, you know, and yet you are taught to run from emotion.
Well, we've discussed that at length.
That's absolutely right. And that's why we actually do focus on a lot of the mental.
Right, because the emotional is frightening for many people.
Terrifying.
And because there's such depth of experience, and we're not taught any of the patterns that are natural in an emotional reality.
Well, you know, emotions are always out of control, aren't they?
No.
Often.
They have their own truth to them.
Sometimes. And sometimes those truths are colored by beliefs.
Oh, it's complicated. It's complex. All right.
Well, and we would say to you that soul thrives on complexity.
All right.
And if you look at the dynamic of what is driving the whole dynamic, if you accept the concept of the divine, and you accept the concept of soul, then do some beings have souls and some not?
No.
Or do all beings have souls? And if all beings have souls, then there is purpose in the whole dynamics of manipulation that is outside of the knowledge base of those that are manipulating.
Yes. So
too with you. We had to stop her for a moment to think about that.
So there are parts of ourselves that are in greater awareness and urging us to move forward. And even though
there is the inner connection with the divine the reason that you incarnated in a physical body
Yes.
and gave yourself the challenges that you gave yourself is all purposeful.
So even what we might consider to be a manipulation and therefore perhaps even a domination,
Well, and using it as an excuse to blame.
we can look even further to beyond that to see that even that manipulation is in line with what the divine's movement is.
Of course.
So
The divine is conscious.
yes, nothing happens by accident.
Right.
So, and,
From our perspective, there are no coincidences.
and as you said in a recent show, if you ignore the coincidences, you're ignoring your soul and you're missing the point, and they're going to have to speak to you more loudly, which brings us right to today, which is the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks in the U.S. And it is poignantly the time of these massive hurricanes in Texas and in the southeast, Florida primarily, one right after another, and there are a couple of other hurricanes floating around out there. So we are being forced out of comfort zones all over the place. We are being forced to deal with realities larger than ourselves. We're being forced to remember that we are not the king of the world, that we're part of a set.
You're making assessments of things and perhaps judgments of things that are not really complete. You are not being urged from without. You are not being done, and nothing is being done to you except repeated reminders. All right? And at first, reality speaks with elegance and with whispers and gives you the opportunity to hear and gives you the opportunity to respond from your heart, gives you the opportunity to assess and to know, to learn, to know, right? And you know, we said we go back to 1963 and the Kennedy assassinations and when that whole dynamic of movement began to shift and change, but it really started in the 90s. And it really started in the 90s when there ceased to be a dynamic of duality within the political spectrum.
All right.
All right, and if you remember, of course, you had Ronnie and you had George H.W., and they were going in a certain direction, but that was more a readjustment of social value of certain things, and it was not necessarily anything other than a swing of the pendulum which led a number of you in your world to forget about the dynamic of altruism and to move into greed. And the 80s, that's what the 80s was all about, was cementing one's position. And in order to not lose again in 1992, we would suggest to you that if you look at the dynamics, and we're not political, and understand that we are only making an assessment based upon what actually occurred, because this one lived through it, you lived through it, this one has memory, you have memory, and those of you who lived through it have memory as well. The Democratic Party changed, and therefore the duality changed. The Democratic Party became more centrist. The Democratic Party became more militaristic. The Democratic Party became more Wall Street. The Democratic Party became more deregulatory. The Democratic Party began to take away what was, quote unquote, the welfare state, and yet what represented the dynamic of compassion in the midst of capitalism.
Safety nets.
Compassion
Right.
in the midst of capitalism, because capitalism in and of itself has no compassion.
No. No, it's a
Succeed or die.
It's a dog eat dog.
Well, so you hear us.
Yes.
As far as that dynamic goes. So things had been shifting and moving and changing ever since then. You know, those of you before 1963, remember how naive you were? Remember how innocent you were? Remember how focused you were on getting to the moon on the Camelot, the quote-unquote Camelot of... There were so many of you had so much hope, had so much love for this particular person. Did he really deserve it? Well, that's up to
history,
his soul to make an assessment.
All right.
Well, ultimately, you know, and we would suggest to you that the success or failure of a lifetime is often reflective in the next lifetime.
That's interesting.
Say it again.
That's interesting.
Well, you know, karma is karma, and it is not instant karma. But, you know, karma is a dynamic that you let's say you're coming in to learn about love in a lifetime. That's karma. That's your karma for that lifetime. You are going to learn about love in that lifetime, or you're going to keep coming back again and again until you do.
Right. It's a choice.
That's just the way that it works. Now, as a child, your soul speaks to you in whispers. It shares with you. It goes through your dreams. It goes through your reality, and through your personal dynamic of reality. You do not have a bigger picture, generally speaking, of that dynamic. So you live in the moment, and it's one moment to another, to another, to another, and it seems sometimes to be so illogical, and yet the purity of a child's laughter, the purity of a child's love, the purity of a child's pain is all part of that dynamic of learning and becoming more and becoming an adult. And in that dynamic, we would suggest to you that after World War II, you moved into your adolescence as a species. Since World War II, you have been in your adolescence. In 1963, 64, 65, 66, with the Vietnam War, with the assassinations of King and both Kennedys, you lost your naivete.
Yes.
You lost your innocence. And then you moved on, and you had the, what shall we say, the checkered career of Richard Nixon. And then the impeachment, or the resignation. And then Gerald Ford. And then Jimmy Carter. We're going to tick some of you off by reminding you that he was a member of the Trilateral Commission with George Soros and Rockefeller, David Rockefeller.
All right. I didn't know about that.
Well, you know, we try to give you new information each time. In that understanding, in that level of understanding, you understand that, you begin to understand that things have been laid out in a certain way. Some people have plans for you, all right, that are not necessarily your own dreams and desires.
Well, there's a lot of information out there now regarding...
There is, and we're not going to get into any great detail around those dynamics, but we only speak of those things that we know of to be true.
So, even though there has been a lot done in order to manipulate us or direct us in certain directions, we still have all the abilities to change this.
Well, yeah, but and we can get into, you want to jump to the end.
Well, but at the same...
But of course, yes, we wish to, this is a reminder. You all still have that ability.
And at the same time, we had certain opportunities to be more adult on this day 16 years ago, or the few days, the weeks, the months after.
Let's go back to, because in order to motivate any real dynamic of change, in order to, let's say, cement a dynamic of change into your reality, when you have given ambiguous messages of that dynamic, of the desire to change along the way, right, there is a dynamic that takes place. And that is what we call the great cosmic "Are you sure?" And so often what has to happen is that something really positive has to happen in order to really motivate that dynamic of "Are you sure?" And if you remember what was going on in 1999,
Yes.
moving up to the change of the millennium, there was a great deal of fear being raised, wasn't there?
Oh, yes, Y2K. Wah!
That was it. Y2K, Y2K, Y2K. The world is going to come to an end. All the computers are because of its little glitch, which they pretty much had fixed way before Y2K. Because once they identified it, it was easy to fix it.
Right.
Right. So very little happened with the dynamic of Y2K. And so that was a big kind of amping up of the dynamic of fear. All right? So then you have the New Year's Eve,
Yes.
and nothing happened. And the relief. And what happened? Time zone after time zone. The celebration was out the brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity. Right?
Yes.
It was. And because of technology, time zone after time zone, that energy began to build. And planet-wide, for the first time, planet-wide, a wave of unconditional love went from time zone to time zone and completely surrounded the planet. Now, that did not say that it did away with the hidden agendas of people. That did not say, but it was a celebration. You had just moved into a new millennium.
Yes.
And people used it as an excuse to do that dynamic of unconditional love, which is, what is the dynamic of people responding to a disaster?
Unconditional love.
First time it ever had happened planet-wide.
Yes, I just want to say that again. It is the first time.
First time that had ever happened planet-wide, and that was only because of the availability of technology.
Yes.
Do you realize how huge that is, dear ones? Do you realize how huge that is? And so that was the prime dynamic of motivation that led to, believe it or not, a whole series of dynamics, which we will get into in the next show, because we only have 4 minutes left in this
Yes.
one, and it's not nearly enough time, right? But we will continue. After a short break, we will be back, and we will continue the dynamic from January 1st, 2000, until present.
And what goes on for us personally goes on for the entire species.
Well, the same mechanics are at
The
play.
same
You know,
mechanics.
we teach you in the dynamics of creating your reality that you create your reality through your thoughts, your words, and your feelings. And as you take more and more responsibility in that area, you gain more and more mastery over your own reality. Well, the same holds true in with the dynamic of the entire species. And as the entire species awakens, which it is,
Right.
things are beyond the possibility of your imagination when you are limited by this paradigm of competition and comparison. And so, We love you all so very, very much. We are SOTU. We'll be back in a few minutes. And until then, we close. Sending you peace, sending you happiness, sending you joy.
Well, we do hope that you come back next week. They're saying a few minutes, which it is for us taping, of course, but as far as the television station goes, it will be next week. So we're leaving you with a cliffhanger. Do follow us. If you'd like more information about SOTU and other short videos that are produced by us of SOTU on a weekly basis, please go to our website, conversationswithsotu.org. And if you'd like some information about how we see peace coming about in our world, or what some of the earmarks of that might look like for our future, there's hope. Please go to our sister site, peacegenesisproject.org.
How come it's a sister site, not a brother site?
Well, it could be the brother site, whatever. It's connected.
Sexism.
We're still dealing in a duality. So, thank you for hanging with us. And as I said, come back next week and we'll have more of this conversation on 9/11/2017.
You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday